Cuphead, the delicious last course, does the best thing it could possibly do. Give us more Cuphead. More bosses, more of that iconic art style, and more of that perfect gameplay. A new character, and more of that brutal challenge, which you'll probably notice from all of my deaths and restarts in the footage. It's more of an amazing game, even if it is a little on the short end. To unlock the DLC, you'll have to be a little ways into the base game. Not too far, you just have to be in the first mausoleum. Then you should see a new character appear that will ferry you to the new island. Once there, we learn that Miss Chalice has discovered a way to return to the land of the living by giving Mugman a special cookie which causes them to swap places, but the effect is temporary. Cue mission to find the magic baking ingredients that'll permanently return Miss Chalice to the corporeal world. Which, by the way, doesn't that kind of make us the jerks in this story? In the base game, you were going around beating people up because you and the bosses were being manipulated by the literal devil. But here, we're kind of just stealing people's groceries. We're kind of the assholes in this case, aren't we? But that's okay because now we get to play as Miss Chalice herself. The way it works in gameplay is you can equip a new charm, the Astral Cookie, that will turn you into Miss Chalice, who comes with her own moveset. I always assumed Miss Chalice would play the same as Cuphead and Mugman. I figured she'd just be, a reskin for people that prefer to play as a female character, but no, they went the extra step and made her feel very different. She comes with a double jump, giving her a little extra maneuverability, and instead of parrying off her jump, it's off her dash. But because you have to have a specific charm equipped to use her, you can't use any other accessory, which, for me, was a bit of a killer, unfortunately. I'd become so used to the iframes of the smoke bomb, it was hard to give it up. Still, it's really cool they went that extra step to make playing as Miss Chalice feel like a completely different experience. They also added in a new weapon to use like the crack shot, which fires in a straight line and suddenly curves at a sharp angle, homing in on bosses and enemies, and it does decent damage to boot, making it a good set and forget type weapon, where you can just hold down the button and focus on dodging. They also added in Converge, which fires 3 shots in a cone-shaped pattern, and the shots pierce enemies, making it a really good way to clean up lots of enemies and projectiles off the screen. And I noticed there's a lot of stuff on screen with some of these bosses. Like a lot of DLC, this feels like it's been tuned for veterans of the base game. So even though you can access the DLC pretty early, I wouldn't recommend it. And if you haven't played the game in a while, or haven't picked it up since launch, it's definitely going to kick your teeth in a bit at the start, until you can shake off the rust at least. Some of you may have noticed that these new weapons sound very similar to some of the ones in the base game. That's because, well, they kind of are. Converge is very similar to Spread Shot of the base game, and Crack Shot fills the same role as Chaser. The new weapons are just better versions of those, with more range, more damage, and a little more attack speed. But honestly, Chaser and Spreader weren't great in the base game. They either did too little damage or had too little range, so I'm kind of okay with just better versions of them. Because on paper, Chaser and Spreader have really great potential. It just took Converge and Crackshot to meet that potential. And a lot of the bosses feel like they're built with these weapons in mind, or maybe vice versa. A lot of the bosses throw a lot of stuff, and a lot of projectiles or a lot of enemies on screen gunning for you. So having Converge to clean things up, or swapping to Crackshot to just focus on dodging is perfect. Kind of wish I figured it out earlier, but better late than never, I guess. Since we can now play as Miss Chalice, you might be wondering, well, what about the Mausoleum challenges? Are they still around? Well, no, not really, at least not on the DLC island. If you don't remember, the Mausoleum challenges had you protecting Miss Chalice from ghosts. All you really had to do was stand in the middle of the room and occasionally jump and parry off of a ghost to kill it. They were the weakest part of the game. They were good tutorials and practice for the parry mechanic, but doing them over and over again with just more ghosts appearing got kind of old fast. So in Delicious Last Course, they got a much needed major overhaul. Now, instead of mausoleums, you have the King's Leap, which strips away all of your weapons, all of your charms, everything, requiring you to use parries to deal damage and are just more challenging. It's all about careful dodging and using the parry in clever ways. These fit the game way more because they feel more like boss fights, more of what Cuphead is best at. Like one has you dodging a horse knight and waiting for the opportunity to parry off of its mane to do damage. Another one has you putting out all of these candles floating around on the screen by running into them to open up the boss for a parry. They're more challenging, more rewarding, and just more fun. I looked forward to the next King's Leap and figuring out how to beat each boss. The King's Leap uses what makes Cuphead so incredible, the boss design, which brings me to the meat of the game. The bosses. The bosses are as good as ever. There's only 6 of them, unfortunately, which makes it hard to show off the game without spoiling stuff, but they all immediately stand out from each other. Like, one of the first ones is a giant pretending to be a mountain, and he's got, like, gnomes mining his gold teeth. And I always love how weirdly dark they can get sometimes. Like, One of the bosses is a giant cow literally bursting out of a building, and as you fight them, they get smaller and smaller until they're a can of beef. Like, that's really dark. All of the bosses are so fun to fight and just burst with personality. A lot of that's due to the game's incredible art style that mimics old cartoons, which is just such a cool art style. And they're still really challenging too, each one testing your skills and pushing you right to your limit. All the bosses have multiple phases that sometimes feel like completely different bosses, requiring you to quickly adapt and learn entirely new attack patterns on the fly. And yet, the game never felt unfair, even when you're dying constantly. And trust me, you'll be dying constantly. I never felt like I got hit by a cheap shot, which is impressive given how much is going on sometimes. If I got hit, it always felt like it was 100% my fault, on me. And because I knew it was my fault, I knew I could go back in and do better. Victory never felt out of reach. I wonder if that's because of the death screen showing you exactly how close you were to the finish line. You can see how much farther you got than last time. It's actually a pretty good motivator. But I do have one worry. Not of the game. The game is great. You should play it. It's just that Cuphead launched all the way back in 2017. The DLC was announced in 2018, which means it took them 4 to 5 years to put out DLC. It's a long time for DLC, man. DLC that, while incredible, will probably only last 3-4 hours for most people. And I bet a lot of that is due to the game's art style. So how long is it going to take for them to put out a full new game? AAA games can afford to wait 5 years because, well, they got all the money and sell their games for $60 to $70, whereas Cuphead's a small indie game that sells for much less. Even though it's probably better than a lot of AAA games, but I digress. Cuphead only took about 10 hours to complete, and the DLC only adds a few hours on top of that. Quality over quantity, sure, I'll take a good indie game that lasts a few hours over a mile-wide, inch-deep Ubisoft open world game any day and happily pay more for the shorter game, but a lot of people only buy maybe, I don't know, one game a month, and a lot of people do want bang for the buck, and I can't blame them for that. So I'm curious what the developer MDHR goes from here. If their next game has the same amount of content as Cuphead, and they up the price, you might see pushback from fans. I don't want them to change the art style of their next game because, I mean, look at it, it's beautiful, but they may have to if they want to get anything out in a reasonable amount of time. But if they do change it, well, that's all people will talk about. But it's obviously at least one reason why their games take so long to develop. I really want these games to be a success because they're so fucking good. They're a masterclass in gameplay, in boss design, and art style, so I really hope both Cuphead and The Delicious Last Course did really, really well. So while The Delicious Last Course may not be the longest, I like to describe like a meal at a 5-star restaurant. The portions may be small, but you know it's going to be goddamn amazing. And this particular 5-star meal only costs about $10 Canadian. More than worth the price if you ask me. So, if you're a fan of Cuphead, you should definitely pick this up. And if you made it to the end of this, thank you, and have a good one.